This low area behind me is the scar of the Lemieux Landslide, which occurred here on the banks of the South Nation River in 1993. The landslide came as no surprise. In fact, the province of Quebec had done studies that identified a risk of major landslides in this area, or land flows, as this one was, and consequently had carried out the removal of the old town of Lemieux, which sat very close to here. They started to expropriate the buildings of Lemieux in 1989, completed the process in 1991, and just 2 years later, this massive landslide occurred. My name is Nick Stow. I'm an ecologist, and this is the ecology of the Ottawa Valley. About 13,000 years ago, when the glaciers retreated from the area of the Ottawa Valley, the weight of those glaciers had pushed the Earth's crust down about several hundred meters below sea level. Consequently, the Atlantic Ocean flooded back up through the St. Lawrence River Valley and up into the Ottawa Valley, where it formed a shallow, cold, brackish sea. And we know that because we can see the fossil records of the animals that lived in that ocean, and we also find these amazing beds of clay, of marine clay, which are commonly known as leda clay. Leda clay is a marine clay. It's a salty clay. It forms in marine environments. And it formed here because we had a massive post-glacial river, the old Ottawa River, carrying clays and silts and sands from those retreating glaciers and depositing them in the Champlain Sea. The Champlain Sea existed for about 3,000 years. It was continually shrinking through that whole time as the land rebounded from the weight of the glaciers. But while it was here, all of that sediment from the Ottawa River, all of that post-glacial sediment was deposited in very thick beds in the bottom of the Champlain Sea. The marine clays that were deposited here, which are called leda clays, have an unfortunate characteristic. Under certain conditions, they can liquefy. When they become saturated, they form a semi-liquid mass, and under the right circumstances, they can begin to flow. And that is what happened here in 1993. Geologists think that it began with a very, very small slump, a very small slope failure down by the South Nation River, which is off in that direction, hidden behind the trees. It was a wet period, and the clays behind that riverbank, behind that slope, which was about 20 meters high along the South Nation River, that clay was saturated. It was in a semi-liquid state. And when that slump occurred, we had what was called a retrogressive failure, resulting in a land flow. The soil, the land here literally slumped and flowed down toward the South Nation River. The scar is more than 600 meters in length, several hundred meters wide. An enormous volume of soil was carried down and deposited into the South Nation River. In fact, it backed the South Nation River up for 4 days before the water could actually break through the dam that had been created. I am now down in the landslide scar itself on the banks of the South Nation River. I'm quite high up. The debris, of course, was very thick here. You can see the land on the other side is somewhat elevated. That would be debris from the old land flow. The river then, over a period of 4 days, managed to cut its way through that debris. You can see a little bit of a delta formed over there. There is a small creek that now runs down through the landslide scar. That may be from that creek, or it may just be leftover debris or deposited there by normal fluvial processes. You can see the muddiness of this river, the dark brown color. That is very typical of rivers running through clay soils. Clay soils are not just prone to landslides, but they are more prone to simple processes of erosion. And here we have an example of this ravine land, which is just a few steps from the Lemieux Landslide behind me. This ravine has formed along the banks of a small creek, which you can see down at the bottom of the valley. It is very characteristic of the clay soil areas to the east of Ottawa, along the Ottawa River, along the South Nation River, and along other tributaries to both of those systems. We often find these cool, damp ravines that have been eroded through the clay soils, forming microclimates that favor very distinct communities. And here we have above me one of the plant species that loves this type of microclimate, and that is hemlock, which thrives in these cooler, damper, more moist areas.